noticed that every time I post content that even remotely references anything sexual, I always get a little more than a handful of people who say things like, "Why are you even talking about this? It's so gross that you even think about this stuff. I'm really gonna do it this time." And while my first reaction was to get slightly annoyed because I'm really easily ticked, I was still very interested to why they were not only not willing to answer the question for whatever reason, but also imply that I was in the wrong for asking in the first place. Despite how positive I thought the West was becoming, sexual content is still quite taboo, especially in relation to children, even when the intent is to be educational. We've had countless puberty and sex ed book bans, entire sex ed curriculums are being gutted and replaced with abstinence-only programs, despite the fact that they're proven to not work, and literal consent education is being stripped from school boards because parents are being uncomfortable with the word consent being used in the same sentence as children. And I know that we all want to believe that this is for the sake of protecting children, but if we really think about it for more than 10 seconds, we can begin to understand that if we refuse to teach them these things, we in turn remove the tools and techniques that would help them protect themselves. It's like if we were to stop doing fire drills because it's sad to think about the possibility of you and your peers burning alive. But that doesn't mean that everyone should stop cooking on grills or doing science experiments in science labs or even going camping with a campfire. Like, yes, it's so sad and depressing when horrible circumstances happen, but that's why you should prepare them for the possibility of horrible circumstances so they're more likely to be safe in certain situations. But of course, I do understand why the taboo exists. I mean, there are valid taboos since they're taboo for the sake of protecting others. Like, the reason why the mention of sexual topics around minors is taboo is because people conflate it with sexualizing minors, and that's a taboo that needs to exist because it actually prevents harm. But then there are also harmful taboos, where they just end up gatekeeping important information because some people just feel uncomfortable. A while ago, I asked the question, if you had a teenager, would you allow them to get an adult toy if they asked for it? Whether allow was buying it for them, seeing what they're ordering to make sure it's safe, or even just letting them buy it on their own without forcing them to return it or taking it away. It was a general question that I thought of due to the fact that the day prior, I had a sponsored post from an adult company that sells adult toys, and some of the comments I received was talking about the fact that they thought it was disturbing that I took the sponsor because minors might see it. And my first thought was a memory when I was probably younger than you're imagining, and while I was out with my parents, we passed by a store that had the words adult toys on the window, and I turned to my parents and asked, "What's adult toys?" And after about 3 seconds of silence, my mom answered, "Oh, you know, stuff like big cars and motorcycles for boys and makeup for girls, stuff that adults like." By that point, I already knew what adult toys were. I just wanted to see what my parents would say to me. And as useless and time-consuming that story might seem, that anecdotal memory just shapes my thoughts on sexual topics and how we should or shouldn't censor ourselves when a curious kid gets involved. My parents tried really hard to censor my childhood from anything inappropriate or non-kid friendly, and on their part, they did great. But when kids become conscious that they're alive, they end up learning a lot of stuff outside of a parent's control. So you, as a parent, can either inform them as best as possible to encourage them to make informed decisions and open yourself to conversation if they have any questions, or you as a parent can let your kid learn through life experiences by themselves. I don't think either parent styles are wrong, and the consequences of those parenting styles vary depending on the type of person the kid is. But as a content creator who has no kids, doesn't cater my content to kids, and specifically uses tags, titles, and age restrictions to say this content isn't made for kids, a minor with my definition of good parent, and also hopefully hasn't been sexually traumatized, should be able to either recognize an adult toy ad is not for them, ask their parents about it, or simply scroll past. If they can't do such, it's probably due to something that's outside of my control. I was a little amused by the people who think that anyone under the age of 18 shall never set their eyes on adult things. I was curious on how those same people would feel in a hypothetical scenario where not only their kid knows what a sex toy is, but also actively wants one. I do really appreciate that the top comments that I received on that poll were emphasizing sexual safety and education above all else, even if the surrounding conversation is uncomfortable. But if you were to sort the comments by new, you might find a couple comments that were very disapproving at the least of the hypothetical. I saw a few that were calling this kind of question inherently predatory and that I should be investigated for asking something like this. I even saw one that said that people who voted yes on the poll were being like themselves, and that allowing teenagers to access safe NSFW products as a parent was worse than dating an 18-year-old because at least that's legal, which personally bad take, but still, I honestly get it. I genuinely do. People ask weird questions that end up mirroring events in the Epstein files, and it's a good thing that people are protective of kids, as they should be. That instinct to protect kids is good and it's supposed to be there, but I swear to God that I don't think people actually understood my question because they saw the keywords and jumped to the worst possible interpretation, because this wasn't a question to kids. I wasn't asking specifically teenagers if they wanted toys. It was a question that was supposed to be aimed at adults about how they'd parent in a situation that, statistically speaking, if they did end up being a parent, a lot of them are probably going to face at some point. But because the topic and keywords are so taboo, some people just can't seem to separate discussing teenage sexual health from an appropriate parenting perspective from sexualizing minors. I also surprisingly got a few just go behind my back and do it, which I think is really sad that you'd rather have your kid do it behind your back instead of just talking to them about it, because you are still allowing your kid to do it just without any oversight. If the concern is that it's inappropriate or harmful, then just go behind my back is pretty much the equivalent to believing that we just should ignore people that do bad things. I mean, they just wanted attention after all, so what if they murdered somebody? I don't want to hear about that. That's gonna be relevant in a later video. But if the concern is safety, then wouldn't removing yourself from that situation make it less safe? If you're okay with your kid doing it behind your back, you've already made the decision that it's acceptable, but you've also chosen the possibility of removing yourself to the point where your kid doesn't feel safe enough that they can come to you if something went wrong, because they believe that they're going to get in trouble for doing it in the first place. And in this specific case, it also teaches kids that shame is the appropriate response to their own bodies. To be clear, I don't care if you wouldn't allow your kid to have a toy. There were a lot of people who said that they'd prefer if the kid uses their hand instead of owning an adult toy before they're actually an adult, which is very reasonable parenting too. But I even saw some comments say that they wouldn't even allow in their house at all, and that letting your teenager is the same thing as pedophiles exposing to children. Even though I understand how they got to that conclusion socially, that is a really troublesome comparison to make. I hope that we can all agree that there is a huge difference between a predator exposing a child to content for the predator's benefit and a parent acknowledging that their teenager is going through puberty and helping them navigate that safely. A predator either introduces something to a child that the child wasn't already experiencing, or takes advantage of the natural curiosity that comes with growing up. But either way, it's crossing that child's boundaries because the predator gets something out of it, which is also why children can prey on other children and why adults can prey on other adults even when it's legal, because predatory behavior is about the behavior and exploitation, not the age. A parent appropriately and educationally responding to something that is already happening inside their child's body is nothing like what a predator does. They're not introducing anything, they're not benefiting from anything, they're just responding. A predator creates or exploits a situation, a protector responds to one. I also got a fairly long comment that brought up a lot of interesting points, since they combated the arguments that it'd be okay to allow your teenager to have a toy for safety and education, because those arguments focus on the teenager's perspective, but people aren't talking about how the parent would feel. They go on to say that they would feel awkward if the kid asked them to buy something like that, and even if they were to say yes, then they'd feel like they'd have to drop all their values for the sake of what he describes as a fear-mongering argument. Well, they're gonna do it anyway. But when people say that, they're mostly talking about the fact that your kid is going to, not the fact that your kid is absolutely going to buy an adult toy for themselves. Even if you don't get them a toy, if they have that sort of thing on the brain, they'll find whatever they have on hand to do it with, whether that be their actual hand, various objects, or consumables around the house. They brought up a comparison to when a teenager asked to go drink at a party all night. They would respond with a firm no instead of agreeing with caveats. But over drinking at an underage, unsupervised party with people that you and your kid doesn't know is different from alone in a private, safe environment. Because for one, drinking isn't a part of most teenagers' biological puberty, and for two, even if it was a part of their biological puberty, a better comparison would be a kid asking you to buy them a beer that they could drink under your house and under your supervision. This commenter believes that parents saying yes to either of these scenarios are parents that have no boundaries, and he suggests that you should instead just be a good parent and hope that they will respect you too. But respect is earned by treating your kid like a person with their own body and experiences, not prioritizing your comfort over their safety. If your response to your teenager experiencing something personally uncomfortable to you is, well, this makes me uncomfortable, so just do what I say, why would they respect that? They also say that they don't want to enable something that could easily become an obsession. But having an object designed to help you complete a task better isn't going to automatically make it into an obsession. Having access to safe education and products doesn't make teenagers obsessed with any more than having access to utensils or food makes them obsessed with eating. It's a normal part of development. The obsession narrative only makes sense if you think sexuality itself is inherently corrupting, which brings us back to purity culture. I think a lot of this ties back to something deeper than just discomfort. Like, it could be about how we conceptualize growing up in the first place. For a lot of parents, there's this idea that childhood is supposed to be innocent, and that innocence means a complete absence of anything sexual. And in that context, acknowledging that your teenager's body is changing, experiencing new feelings, that they might be curious about things, could feel like you're taking away their innocence, like as if you're ending their childhood prematurely, which is why certain families who implement purity rings, abstinence talks instead of actual education, and waiting until marriage aim for the goal of preserving their innocence, even though to their standards that ship has biologically sailed if the kid didn't turn out to be ace. Which is funny, since being ace is also considered taboo for some reason. You want sex, you're too young to do that, you need to wait till you're older. You don't want sex, you're too young to determine that, you need to wait until you're older. Very productive, isn't it? I do want to say that I do appreciate that is still taboo to some extent because it does work in my favor if I want to use it to aggravate somebody or say a group of people, but I more so agree that there are many instances where sexuality and sexual topics overall do not need to be brought up. Like, I'm all for sex positivity, but maybe let's not put sexual phrases on literal baby essential products to, at best, make a weird attempt to make the most unfunny millennials laugh, or at worst, make fun of a very real set of connections that was specifically targeted to minors and their parents to groom them. Like, call me crazy, but whoever approved that needs to be fired. Apparently this brand also deleted the Meet the Team segment on their site, which I don't understand why. As you can probably tell by now, I'm very positive, pro-consent, pro-kink, and even pro-education for minors. But I just personally feel like there's a difference with accepting things like this considering the context. Some people who have a different viewpoint of it might say that all this noise is just purity culture again. These packagings are very obviously for the parents and not the babies. It's not like the babies are going to see these ads, let alone even be able to read them, and it's not like no one knows what happened at least 9 months ago for this baby to be here in the first place. That the people who view this as predatory or even just weird are the actual weirdos, because it's suspicious that they're even thinking about that in the first place. But these aren't one-off incidents where a company just didn't think a slogan all the way through. It's multiple products from the same company that use phrases that I can't even say on this platform or else I'll get demonetized. So in my eyes, when a brand repeatedly uses phrases that are so explicit they trigger safety filters or community guidelines, I can't help but assume that they're purposefully blurring that line. There is a difference between normalizing a baby's body during a diaper change and full-on sexualizing it. Using terms that are typically reserved for adult kink or hookup culture to describe a medical procedure on a baby, honestly, I would even argue that it's outright a violation of the child's dignity. I'm not against fun or joking, especially when the joke is supposed to make tired parents just chuckle or something, but the punchline of a joke that has any relation to kids should never be the kids. There's a Family Guy bit that I find really funny that goes,
"Yeah, and I like how you're at least 18 years old.
Actually,
I like how you're at least 18 years old." Her nickname was Baby, which means over 18 years old.
It's a joke about grooming, but the butt of the joke is the groomer's cognitive dissonance, not the person that's being groomed. In the baby products and ads where they use the phrase, "this is what happens when you don't pull out," along with an image of a baby with gooey slime on their face, the unfunny joke relies on the reader projecting an adult sexual act onto the infant's body or the parent's interaction with that body, with no sort of moral distance. In satire like Family Guy, there's a certain amount of moral distance between the writers and the creepy character so that you can laugh at the weird, gross predator, but in this company's marketing, the brand wants to laugh with you, the parents, by viewing your own child through a lens as a joke. They released a response to all the backlash basically saying that it was just a joke, you sensitive ninnies. There is a massive ethical gap between a parent making a tired, private joke to a partner at 3 a.m. and a multi-million-dollar corporation where most of the employees on their advertising and packaging team aren't parents or specialists in children's health, joking about getting jealous over a baby rectal thermometer and turning those jokes into a global marketing strategy. This company's whole thing is being the brand that tells it like it is, break the perfect parent image by being unfiltered and messy just like how real parenthood is. But they just lean way too far into double entendres that link adult sexual behavior with infant care. If it were any other brand, I doubt I'd really care about the breast milk ice cream or the Mardi Gras boobs float, since it might have just felt like standard bold marketing from a raunchy company that was only affiliated with adults. But it's not. The thing that draws my "this is too far" line is basically consent and context. A literal baby cannot consent to being a part of anything remotely non-educationally sexual. But a teenager who's going through puberty asking for their parents' consent to have access to a tool that they would use hopefully safely and most likely by themselves is based on seeking information and protection. One strips dignity from someone who has no say in the matter, the other respects someone's curiosity with respectful education. I also want to make clear that the people who said no in the poll aren't bad people or even hypothetical bad parents, but they are people who have been taught that even discussing this topic in relation to minors is inherently wrong, even when the discussion is specifically about how to keep minors safe. I think most people would agree that they want to keep teenagers safe. They want kids to grow up healthy and informed. But kids can't really be informed if the people who could inform them safely and appropriately get met with, "why are you even thinking about kids in that way?" That kind of question also gets brought up a lot when people bring up cases where adults are pointing out something as sexualizing children. Someone will call out inappropriate content involving minors, and there's always someone in the reply saying, "why are you thinking about kids that way?" It's used as a deflection tactic that tries to make the person calling out the problem seem like the problem itself. It was something I saw a few times when I was looking into that company that for some reason thought utilizing baby products was a good idea, but I see that most when parents post their kids doing kid things. Obviously, the problem will never be the actual kid. It will always lie with the parents. Every time I see a kid online, especially if it comes from a mom influencer, I instantly block them. I do not want to get reminded of the reality of parents exploiting their kids' childhood for internet clout. People will beg in the parents' comment section to stop posting their kids, because even though yes, it's so necessary that everyone in the world must see your toddler in a bathtub, dancing, smiling, opening their mouth, sucking their thumb, and walking around in a diaper, a lot of the people who actively look for your content that you post of your kid are people who you shouldn't want looking at your kids. And yes, I know with the exceptions of grieving parents and other kids on the internet who like watching content with people around their own age, but I'm also not stupid and naive enough to believe that they're the only ones. So many people will jump onto them saying, I can't believe you would think of that, not stopping to think once that the reason why a lot of people know what groomers are into is because they're the victims of child grooming who constantly try to warn others about how dangerous posting your kids online can be. I saw this video of a woman talking about how tickling, blowing raspberries, and wet willies can be a grooming tactic because if the adult in the situation would refuse to comply to a child's request to stop or no and just continue to touch the child anyway, it would be pushing their boundaries and conditioning them to tolerate touching in places that they shouldn't be touched. Emphasis on the point being that the actual grooming tactic is refusing to listen to a child's no when they don't want to be touched, even when the touching is meant to be playful. But there was also a surprising amount of people who more so dismissed what she was saying, seemingly so because they didn't actually listen to what she was saying. Many of the commenters were saying that they didn't understand how tickling by itself could be grooming, so she should stop telling other families what to do, especially since it seems like she's the problem for getting all offended over emotional expression. Honestly, she probably wouldn't even be saying this if this happened with her mom instead of her dad. If you were to go to her account, one of the videos that she has pinned is her talking about her mother not only protecting her father, but also about her mom created CSAM of her when she was a minor by her mom's own free will and still essayed her as an adult, and many more things that her mother also did to her. It's so gross to bring gender wars into something like someone advocating against CSA. To go back to the specific tickling point, if we were looking at this from a psychological or even a therapeutic context, she'd be right. She specifically said that the reason why her dad tickling her was a form of abuse was because he never stopped even when she cried and begged for him to stop. Therapists and child safety experts widely recognize that ignoring a child's no or stop, even in seemingly innocent contexts like tickling, teaches children that their bodily autonomy doesn't matter. It's a documented grooming tactic called boundary erosion or desensitization that conditions children to believe that adults don't have to respect their physical boundaries, which in turn makes them more vulnerable to escalating abuse. Organizations like RAIN, Darkness to Light, and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children all discuss how seemingly playful boundary violations can be warning signs. Children learn consent through practice. If their no is respected during less intense situations, they learn that their voice matters. But if their no is ignored receptively and purposefully, they learn that adults can override their bodily autonomy, which makes them easier targets for actual abuse because they've been conditioned to not resist or report. It's true that not everyone who tickles a child and doesn't immediately stop when a child says so the first time is a predator, but again, it matters within the context. A pattern of ignoring a child's verbal or physical stop signals, especially when combined with other boundary pushing behaviors, is a legitimate red flag that professionals who are mandated reporters are trained to recognize and report. It frustrates me so much that the majority of people who are actually listening to her are people who have gone through these things themselves and have their own personal experiences to go off of. But the people who seriously need to internalize her warnings just brush her off because it's not my problem that your mom married a Lamau. Yes, it is. It is on the duty of all adults to protect all children, no matter if they're ours or not. She is sharing very specific signs that you can look out for to see if a kid is in safe hands. But people just seem so much more invested in defending their right to ignore a child's stop that they can't even process what she's actually saying and instead gaslight her into thinking that she's at fault. Adults and minors can have healthy, familial, mentor, and professional relationships, but it's very subjective to when people start claiming that those relationships become or quote-unquote romantic. There are a lot of bad people out there who do bad things to children, who will pin the blame on those who are trying to protect them. It is very important to recognize the difference between those two kinds of people. I promise you that predators know how to exploit our discomfort with these types of conversations. They know that if they can make you feel weird for asking questions, you'll stop asking. They know that if they can frame people who give up their lives protecting children as suspicious, they can operate in the silence that creates. Teachers who report abuse and get accused of overreacting. Mandated reporters who face backlash from families. Survivors who try to tell their stories, warn others of what predators look like and what they look for, get dismissed as being too sensitive. And even people who work in child advocacy get accused of being suspicious for knowing so much about abuse because people aren't actually listening to them. Because why would they? They're talking about kids and sexual stuff, and that's bad, right? Children don't need to hear about things like this, so let's just not talk about such things until there's actually evidence. Or in other words, when it's too late. I don't know. That's just me. Laters. I'm really gonna do it this time. And well... Higashi. Stop it.